What became of the workers who helped Noah construct the ark? We'd like to read from Genesis chapter 6, then chapter 7, and then read what the New Testament has to say concerning this. In Genesis chapter 6, verse 5, it says, "And God saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually." Now that's getting to a pretty wicked stage. "And it repented the Lord that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him at his heart. And the Lord said, I will destroy man whom I have created from the face of the earth, both man and beast, and the creeping thing and the fowls of the air. For it repenteth me that I have made them. But Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord." And then chapter 7, verse 1 beginning, it says, "And the Lord said unto Noah, Come thou and all thy house into the ark. For thee have I seen righteous before me in this generation. Of every clean beast thou shalt take to thee by sevens, the male and his female. And of the beasts that are not clean by two, the male and his female. Of the fowls also of the air by sevens, and the male and the female. To keep seed alive upon the face of all the earth, for yet 7 days, and I will cause it to rain upon the earth, 40 days and 40 nights. And every living substance that I have made will I destroy from off the face of the earth. And Noah did according to all that the Lord commanded him. And Noah was 600 years old when the flood of waters was upon the earth." And then in Matthew chapter 24, quite a revealing section of verses that gives us a little insight into what it's going to be like when something very similar happens at the end of time. Here in Matthew 24, verse 37, it says, "But as the days of Noah were, so shall also the coming of the Son of Man be. For as in the days that were before the flood, they were eating and drinking and marrying and giving in marriage until the day that Noah entered into the ark, and knew not until the flood came and took them all away, so shall also the coming of the Son of Man be." What became of the workers who helped Noah construct the ark? Now these scriptures that we have read tell us, as in the days of Noah, so shall it be at the end of time. No time for religion then, and no time or little time for religion today. Little interest or interest only in eating and drinking and marrying then, and interest today only in eating and drinking and marrying as you look around. No concern for the termination of life and the possible judgment after that in the time of Noah, and no concern concerning death and judgment in our time. And so the multitudes go through life without God, and they die. They're placed in a Christless casket and lowered into a Christless grave. And then they face a Christless eternity with no hope. And many today, do not believe in the flood, but that's nothing. They didn't believe in the flood then either. Many today do not believe in God, and certainly that's nothing, because they didn't believe in God in those days. People today believe that God is so kind and so merciful that he will not punish with an eternal condemnation, but that's nothing. They didn't believe in that in Noah's day either. Today there are atheists, there are skeptics, there are agnostics, as well as those who feel that they can have a better plan of their own instead of God's plan, but that's nothing, really, because the same kind of people lived back in Noah's day. Now, there was a day in years gone by when people ridiculed the story of the flood, and still some do in our time. But that kind of day isn't exactly like it used to be, because high in the mountains of British Columbia are fossil evidences of a tremendous flood at one time. And down in the southwest country of our own land, there are fossil remains that show us that something like this happened in days gone by. And these remains are today 1,000 miles away from the ocean. And added to all this is the very serious possibility of discovery and actual removal of the ark itself from Mount Ararat. Yet unbelief in this Bible story of Noah is not new. They refused to believe it in Noah's day. So I believe that this true story of past history becomes a very valuable story to give some thought to. And I say especially from the standpoint that just like it was in the day of Noah, so shall it be at the end of time. And this thought is good not only for the person who is not a Christian, but this thought is good for those who are Christians. It's good for Christians who have become immune to the teaching and the preaching of God's Word. When you begin to think about this story of so many years ago, you can't help but observing that God warned those people of their coming doom. Now, we know that for 120 years before this happened, that God started warning these people. We know, too, that men and women lived a long time in those days, and so those people lived many, many years hearing this warning. Some people in that time lived to be 800 or 900 years old. We know that Methuselah, the oldest man who ever lived to be 969 years. You know, that's a long time, but he still died before his father. You believe that? Can you believe that a man who lived to be 969 years and was the oldest man on earth and still he died before his father? Well, the same Bible that tells us about the Noah story tells us about Methuselah's dad, who was Enoch. Here was a man who would be an ancestor of Noah, who beget Methuselah, who in turn beget Lamech, who in turn beget Noah. Noah was in a good bloodline. But even though this was true, God was grieved over the wickedness of man, and he decided to destroy everything that moved on the earth, everything that lived. That's why you read in chapter 6, verse 13 and 14, God said unto Noah, the end of all flesh is come. Isn't that tragic? For the earth is filled with violence, and behold, I will destroy them with the earth. And so he said, make thee an ark of gopher wood. Rooms shalt thou make in the ark, and shall pitch it within and without with pitch. When God stated those words, he was pronouncing a doom upon people that would certainly come to pass because of their wickedness. And listen, please. We need to know that nothing ever passes God's notice. It may seem as if God is unaware. We may feel that we cover up everything and that we are refusing just the right things and we are defying those things that we feel we ought to. We may feel that we can ignore, but listen, any action that you and I take in regard to these things does not blindfold God. God sees everything. God is aware of everything. This was very true in that time, and that's why God warned, and he left Noah with some instructions. And so we begin to see Noah starting his work. Noah didn't argue with God. Noah did not say, Lord, I'm not a boat maker. He didn't say, now look, God, I'm a farmer. He didn't say, now God, I take care of sheep. He didn't say, now God, I'm a trucker. Noah didn't argue with God. He didn't say, Lord, I don't have time. He didn't say, now how much is there in this for me? Noah didn't say, now God, look, you keep track of your business and I'll keep track of my business. Noah didn't say that. Noah didn't say, I've got a big family. Noah didn't say, now, I've got my business and I've got my property. I've got my possessions and I have to look after them. Noah didn't argue with God. The Scriptures strongly indicate and tell us that Noah went to work. And so Noah began to stake out the measurements of that boat. So he staked out 450 feet one direction, 75 feet in another direction, and aimed for 45 feet in another direction. And those neighbors came up and said, Noah, what are you doing? And I suppose he said, I'm building a boat. And they probably reacted and said, well, now how many boats? Well, he said, I'm only building one boat. And they looked out across those stakes there and 450 feet long, and they thought, how can you just build one boat? That looks to me like you're building a whole shipyard full of boats. But he said, no, sir, I'm building one boat. And they said, you're crazy. You're just as crazy as can be. Well, Noah explained. He told them what God had told him. He explained what he was going to do, and he explained what was going to come to pass. And you can just know that that news spread all through the country. Why? Because here Noah was at least 100 miles from any ocean. And the smallest creek wouldn't even float a canoe. And Noah was building a boat that was 450 feet long. And if there were any headlines in those days, those headlines must have read, there's a crazy man in the mountains. Or there's a crazy man out there on the plains. And I would just about have to conclude that sightseeing buses came from every direction. And I wouldn't doubt but what information was given out to go see this thing at a pretty high expense. And I expect we could conclude that guides out to this peculiar place were paid a pretty good price to take people out to see what was going on out here on the mountainside or out here on the plain. But anyone and everyone who visited this place went away concluding that something had gone wrong with the machinery of Noah. They took their pointing finger and circled their ear and said, something's wrong with that man. I believe he's lost his marbles. But you have to know this, that Noah never doubted, and he stayed on the job. He kept on working. Though there's no record of anything along this line, there must have been workers who helped Noah in this building construction. Those great big beams had to be lifted into place some way. And you'd almost have to conclude that somebody or several people besides Daddy and 3 sons had to be occupied in making this great big long ship. Now maybe Noah and his sons swapped work with the neighbors. We used to swap work with our neighbors. We'd help them put up hay and they'd help us put up hay. Dad would mow their hay and then they'd come and bale our hay, or vice versa. So maybe Noah swapped work with his neighbors, and those neighbors helped him with the ark. Most writers and anyone who has studied this subject have concluded that they feel like that some different ones had to help Noah in the construction of the ark. And I wonder if these workers and neighbors who were so closely associated with this devout man in this construction, if possibly they were convinced more than anyone else that something is true about this man's story. They witnessed Noah's sincerity, they observed his hard work, and they couldn't help but see his righteous ways. I must feel that some of these folks believed his story and intended to come into the ark sometime. But anyway, through it all, Noah stayed on the job. He kept working, he kept telling people. He keeps right on receiving the people as they came from afar to see what was going on here. As they heard this strange man speak about this strange boat and tell them about a strange flood that was coming. How many thousands of people must have come to see all of this, and they went away saying, that man has to be crazy. But in spite of it all, God had still warned. And this Noah, this righteous man of God, was working. And he kept working when he got weary of working. He just kept right on. Now, the warning had come. The working had taken place. But then that 120th year also rolled around. Noah doesn't plant his crops this year like he planted them every other year. Didn't need to. Noah didn't set out the tomato plants, plant the beans, start the garden this year like he had every other year. People observed this and they wondered just a little bit and asked him, Noah, how come? And Noah said, look, this is the 120th year. This is the year. And I expect the people just kind of smiled. Noah, you better put out your garden. You better start mowing the hay because the cattle are going to need it this fall. He didn't have time for that. He's putting the finishing touches on that ark. But even at that, Noah still pled with the people, but he pled in vain. But you know, there was one morning that Noah heard a voice. And this was that same kind of voice that he had heard so many years ago. It had the same ring to it, the same sound to it. He could tell it was coming from the same source that voice spoke before. And this voice this time said, "Come, Noah, come thou and all thy family into the ark." And Noah knew what that meant. But I want you to notice something interesting. After these 120 years had gone by and God calls Noah into the ark, that God didn't have to say, "Noah, you come into the ark except for your wife. You leave her out." He didn't have to say that, did he? Now, Lot's wife, remember her? God didn't have to say, except for your oldest son. God didn't have to say, come into the ark, all of you, except your youngest daughter-in-law. Didn't have to say that, did he? Why? Because Noah's religion, Noah's faith was that kind of religion, that kind of faith that every one of his children respected their father's God and their father's religion. You can tell from what happened that the children, the daughters-in-law, preferred Dad's faith in God above all the satanic attractions all around the ark and all through the community. They believed in Noah's God. And you can just know that if there were drugs in that day, these young people believed in Noah's God more than the drugs. If there were X-rated theaters downtown in those days, Noah's children and those they married believed in Noah's religion more than the X-rated theaters. And if smoking was a temptation in those days, Noah's children believed in the God of his faith. And if there were those kind of television programs that just send you up the wall unrighteously, you can just know that Noah's children had no part in that. They believed, that's right, they believed in the religion of their dad. That dad had an influence. And that influence permeated that whole family and set that family in order in the midst of wickedness that had not been paralleled up to that time. And you wonder about the parallel of our time. You can't help but see that. And so you thank God for Noah's faith and the family that followed that faith. They believed in him, and so they all walked that gangplank together. Wasn't that a blessed sight to see that family walk together into the ark? And listen, even the sons' wives, when you give it a little bit of thought, Noah had so much devotion that even his sons' wives believed in their father-in-law's faith. That the faith of daddy-in-law attracted these in-laws, and they said, I believe in your God beyond all that we see out there in the world. And to that you have to say amen. But as they walked the gangplank that day together, there isn't a cloud in the sky. The sun is shining, and the birds are singing just like any other day. The birds didn't have any reason to stop singing. They didn't know what a thunderstorm was like. There was no sign of rain, and you can just know that the report spread through the country that Noah's family has gone into the ark. But then the people saw a strange sight that they'd never beheld before in all their lifetime. They looked out their windows and they saw birds flying from the distance, flying directly into the ark. All kinds of birds, all different colored birds, all different sizes of birds, flying directly into the ark in an orderly manner. These birds were flying in such a strange way that it appeared that some strange power was guiding them into that ark. The people While they looked out the front window, one of the children came running and said, "Dad, look out the back window. Here come different animals from all over the area, out of the forest and off of the prairies, and all these different kind of animals rushed toward and into the ark, and they seemed to be moving in such an orderly way that again people had to think there was an unseen force causing all of this." When did you ever see two sheep walking side by side so orderly up a gangplank? They have to have a goat lead them. When did you ever see two giraffes walking side by side? Or two elephants? Or two lions? Or two tigers? Different kinds of animals. Animals that weren't used to living with one another, walking side by side or behind one another in an orderly, quiet, peaceful way. Something was taking place. All of these were moving toward and into the ark in an orderly fashion. What was the meaning of all of this? Well, the people congregated again to view this phenomena. They ran to their wise men, their scholars, and asked for an explanation. Don't you think we ought to all get into the ark? And you can know that those wise men said there's nothing to worry about. We've studied the stars and we've referred to our books, and there's no sign of rain. There's nothing to be alarmed about. Just forget it. Go back to your homes. But I ask you, what about all the workers who helped Noah build that ark, who worked just a little bit closer to this than the average person out through the community? I don't know what all to think or to say, but I keep believing and thinking that they were more interested because they had seen so much of this firsthand. They had been right next to it. I feel that they had perhaps thoughts of entering into that ark just as soon as they saw the least sign of rain, because they'd been around that thought so much. I can just see Noah stand there at that door, that last step at the door, turning around and preaching again and pleading again and warning again for the last time, will you come into the ark? But no one came into the ark. And God had, of course, called Noah into the ark. And God said there's going to be one more week, 7 more days. 2 days pass. 3 days and 4 days and 5 days pass. 6 days, and there's not a cloud. The sun's still shining and the birds are still singing there in the trees. 7 days pass. And I suppose during this last week with all them in the ark that God is testing Noah. And possibly he's waiting one more silent week, hoping that some soul, some lone soul will rethink all of this and make a decision in favor of God. But finally, the last day passes. Not only that, but the last hour passes. And the last minute passes. And that door is closed by the hand of heaven, and the doom of the world is sealed. There'll be no change after this exact moment. And you think, where are the workers? Where are those who knew so much firsthand? Those who were so closely associated with Noah, who had been involved in all of this. Where were they? But you see, all of a sudden, from the east and from the west and then from the north and the south, Those black clouds begin to cover the skies as they move toward one another, and then the whole sky is covered with the dark clouds of doom. What a storm begins. The water begins to tumble down in torrents. The sea begins to burst over its walls that God placed them behind. The rivers begin to leave their banks. The fountains of the deep break up. The volcanic eruptions open up crevices and holes in the crust of the earth, and those artesian lakes underneath begin to shoot into the air. The lowlands are all covered. Those possessions are lost. The people flee. The cattle, the homes are all abandoned. And the families scream and scatter aimlessly. And you can just know that 10 minutes before all of this, Noah could not have traded that ark for any one pair of broken down oxen. But now let me tell you, those people would have traded their cattle and their lands and their gold and their silver for just one small room inside of that ark. Just one small room. These people had done just like a lot of people are doing in our day. But listen, none of us can go through life ignoring God and ignoring Christ and ignoring the church and living selfish lives. No one. You be assured, please, that just as sure as the sun sets in the evening, there is a time coming when you will be glad, would be glad to exchange anything, everything you have for just one more chance. Just one little chance. And that's true not only of church-going people, but of people who are flippantly living their lives in every community of the world. They would exchange all they have for one moment of chance. You think of the millions who are passing by the Savior, living their own kind of lives in their own way. A lot of people think it's all the preacher, that screaming preacher. They think it's the church. They think it's God. The unreasonableness of God. People who are masters at blaming others, blaming God, blaming things, blaming relatives. And all of this has crowded into their minds over the years, and so they've ignored God and Christ and the church and God's people. But let me tell you, there will come a time when they face God that they would wish for one moment again. One more moment. If any of those people ever had a chance of reaching the ark, you can know that they cried, "Noah! Noah, open the door and let us in, Noah!" But I'm confident, as solid as those walls were, and as noisy as the rushing waters were on the outside, that Noah didn't hear one peep out of those people. Noah was on the inside. He couldn't hear. He was safe. He was secure. He didn't have a thing to worry about. But what happened to those who helped Noah build the ark? I wonder if they weren't huddled just kind of outside. If so, I'm confident that they would be beating on the same wall or the same door that any other might have beat upon if they ever arrived at the ark. And cried the same thing, "Noah! Noah, we helped you. We believed your story more than anyone else. We always intended to come into the ark. Open, Noah. Let us in, Noah." But you see, Noah didn't hear them. Not only that, God had closed that door to everyone. Why did those workers perish? For the same reason that all the others perished, and for the same reason that thousands are perishing today. They were not in the ark. That's why they perished. Oh, they knew Noah personally. They knew that teaching. They were closely associated to those who were now on the inside of the ark. They were almost right-hand buddies to them. But listen, they weren't on the inside of the ark. They were on the outside of the ark, and they were now facing God. And they had never faced Him before. But they were now facing God. Now, I believe that there isn't a person here tonight but what feels that they will or that they want to be right with God at the right time. Sometime. How many in that time and still in this time have been ever so close, but still on the outside of the ark, outside of that place of safety and security? Those of you who have not accepted Christ, if you had lived in Noah's day, you would have refused to venture near the ark. Do you know that? Or you would venture near to Christ today. Quite near. Those of you who just kind of stay close, but not totally live what you know, would still have been on the outside of that ark. Thinking down deep in your soul, yes, I'm going to get right someday, but I'm not quite ready today. And oh, you think of all the thoughts that rush through the minds of people, excusing, and delaying. Waiting and waiting. Wanting something, hoping for something, waiting for something else that then is the time, and that will be the time that I'll make my decision and do for God. That's why even the workers who helped Noah were still on the outside of that ark. They thought they would get ready sometime. They intended to, but they had a little more work to do. They had a few more trades to make. They had some more dollars to obtain. They had a little more fun to enjoy. They had a little bit more of life to live. But you know, when that 120th year came and that last hour and that last moment, it came without any warning. And all those people who had concluded, someday I'm going in and someday I'll be ready and I think I will, were still caught on the outside of that ark. Weren't they? Still caught on the outside of that ark. And the same thing will happen when Jesus Christ returns again. None of us at any time in our lifespan have any right to conclude that I know just about when Jesus is going to come back again, therefore I'll get ready at that time. Listen, my people, you and I need to be ready today, tonight, this hour. Because the next hour, Jesus might come. just like the flood came. It will come without warning. And that's why the Scriptures encourage us to know that, behold, today is the day of salvation. And may I tell you this, please, that what seems to be important will be so worthless when that moment comes that you're not warned about. How things seem to be so important in our time. How we feel it so personally. I need an education. I need a means to make a livelihood. I have friends. I have loved ones. I have a home. I have property. I have these pleasures. I have. And these things seem to be so important, and in a sense they have their place. But look, when Jesus comes back again, and things explode just like they fell apart in the time of Noah, you wish that you had given up everything and been right with God. Can you feel that? Can you know that? Oh God, pluck at my heartstrings and help me to know and help me to feel, so that I'll think right and decide right and be right. How tragic it must have been for those who worked so close with that ark